Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm going to be discussing my most disappointing reads of 2023. Now, this is different than like my worst reads. The distinction is that these are disappointing books and that I went into these books thinking that I was going to enjoy them, but I ended up not loving them. Some of these books I did enjoy and I gave decent ratings. Some of them I did not enjoy. But overall, these were just the most disappointing books. So not the worst, just disappointing. And with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Also, these books aren't in any kind of order, like this is the most disappointing or like this one was the least disappointing. No, I think I'm basically going in chronological order. So like books that I started off earlier in the year and then ending with books that I read later in the year. So basically not in order. The first one I'm going to start with, though, is The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Baker. Now, I'm not going to say this is a terrible book by any means, and I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy it, but I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars, and mainly that was because of some plot elements that were in here I did enjoy, and some of the violence was pretty dark and gruesome, and there were some interesting moments, but overall, I really just didn't enjoy the writing style of this. It's definitely different than most fantasy books I've read. This book was just overall sort of confusing for me, like I wasn't exactly sure what was happening in the moment, and like the world building was kind of weird too, and there was a lot of like just random passages where he just talks about like the history of this world, and I don't know, it just didn't feel cohesive for me. Like I said, I just didn't like the writing style. Some of the characters were pretty good, not really any outstanding for me. I thought about reading the second book, but I'm probably just gonna DNF the series. I don't think R. Scott Baker is for me. My next most disappointing book, which was pretty disappointing because I really liked the first 2 books in this trilogy, would be Lochlands by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the 3rd book in said trilogy. I think it's called the Founders Trilogy. The first book, of course, being Foundry Side, which, is fantastic. I either gave it like 4.5 or 5 stars. Just really good, really stand out first book in a fantasy trilogy. And then the second book wasn't quite as good, but I still really enjoyed it. Gave it like 4.5 stars. Shorefall. Both of those books were excellent, and I was really hoping that he would stick the landing, and this was going to be like one of my favorite fantasy trilogies ever written. But unfortunately, that did not happen. The third book kind of does something that I don't really like. It has a huge time jump. And sometimes time jumps, yeah, I'm not a big fan of them. Sometimes they can work, but this is like an 8-year time jump, and you're just thrown into this situation where you don't really have any idea what's going on, and you have to like, and some important things happen within that time jump, and you're just like, why didn't we get the story from here? And then also like, just with the nature of this magic system, it gets to the point where I couldn't quite wrap my head around what was going on some of the time with this magic system. So just overall, very disappointing. I am glad, however, that Foundry Side can kind of be read as a standalone. Obviously, it's a trilogy, but I could go back and reread Foundry Side just on its own and be fine with that. But yeah, I am disappointed, very disappointed that Lochlands did not live up to the hype. My next most disappointing book is My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. And this was a bummer because this was one of our books that me and Stacy did for Thrill Chill or Kill Book Club over on the Book Astronomer Discord, which we're doing again, by the way, in 2024. But yeah, I was super excited for this one. because it had Dexter comparisons, like, oh, I think it's the wife who's supposed to be, sort of a serial killer, and like, how does, basically, in any kind of book that gets mentioned in the name of Dexter, I'm getting hyped for. And yeah, this was one of those instances where I was like thinking I was gonna just love this book. 5 stars. And then I get into it and it was just so boring. Like, the first 80% of this book was just super boring and characters that I did not care for. It really didn't go in the direction that I wanted it to. And then all of a sudden, and like before I get to that, the first 80%, I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be like a 2-star book. I really don't like this. I would have probably DNF'd it if it weren't for the book club. And then all of a sudden, like, the last 20% gets pretty interesting. And I'm like, well, where the hell is this in the rest of the book? Like, if the whole book would have been like centered around like this idea, like the last 20% of the book, it would have been a really good book. But good God, it took forever to get there. But yeah, overall, very disappointed. I ended up giving it 3 stars, I think, mainly just because of that last 20% of the book was actually really good. But yeah, overall, very disappointing. My next most disappointing book is Keep It in the Family by John Mars. And I was excited to read this one because I really enjoyed The Passengers, which was a really cool kind of like sci-fi thriller. Really good book if you haven't read that, by the way. So I was very interested to try this one out. This one was definitely not a sci-fi thriller. It was more of a domestic thriller. I think I would have liked it better if I would have just read this physically. I did this on audio, like I immersion read it, and the way the audio is set up kind of gave away the twist, which is always a bummer because like I'm only like a couple chapters in and I'm like, oh, this is what's gonna happen. And I was basically able to tell that because of the way that the audiobook is set up, and it was very disappointing. And like I said, I probably would have enjoyed it more if I would have read it physically. And then after going back and looking on like Audible reviews, they're like, don't listen to the audiobook, just read it physically. So yeah, if you're gonna read this book, highly recommend doing it physically, because if you do the audio, you basically get spoiled for the twist, which is very dumb. Overall, it was okay. Like, I gave it 3 stars, but like I said, I probably would have enjoyed it more if I would have been surprised by it. And my next most disappointing book is Holly by Stephen King. This one, uh, I was, I'm obviously excited for any Stephen King book that we get. I had my expectations lowered a little bit just because it's Holly Gibney getting her own full length novel. Like, in the past, we've gotten, she was in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy and she was okay in that. And then she was in The Outsider, which is one of my all time favorite Stephen King books. And I did enjoy her in that. And then probably her best story is If It Bleeds, which is her novella in If It Bleeds. And that one was really good as well. But I was like, does her character warrant a full length novel? And for me, not really. I didn't really enjoy this novel. And it wasn't really necessarily because of Holly herself. It was mainly just, I have my own dedicated review, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but overall the story was okay, but just the things that King kept bringing up in the book with politics and COVID just constantly really hampered my enjoyment of it. But yeah, overall, it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. I really just want King to come out with a banger of a novel because Holly wasn't very good. Fairy Tale started out good, but wasn't that great. Like, I want like a really good novel from him. Hopefully, You Like It Darker is much better. My next most disappointing book is The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. And I was wanting to read this book and a few of her other books for quite some time. I had this book for a while. And I know some people, like on BookTube, give her lots of praise and say that she's one of the best, like most underrated, like horror thriller writer out there. And this is definitely one of her more popular books. So I was very excited to read this. And this was kind of a weird reading experience. It takes place in two different timelines, and normally I love stories like that, like multiple timelines. But this was an instance where I liked one way more than the other. The past timeline, if that just would have been like a short book or even like a novella, I would have given it 5 stars. I was really engrossed in that story. But the present timeline that kind of ties everything together, I really didn't care about. Like the characters in there, I didn't care about. I didn't care about what they were going through, basically any of it. So it was just this weird juxtaposition, if I can say that word. It was a weird juxt. Okay, I'm not going to say that word anymore. It was a weird thing going on where like the past storyline was like 5 stars, and then the present timeline was like 2 stars. So it kind of had this weird rating of like 3.5 because like I loved half of this book and I really didn't care for the other half, but they were happening like simultaneously, like flip flopping. I don't know. It was weird to rate this book, but overall, fairly disappointing. And I will probably try more from her, but overall, the Winter People didn't do it for me. My next most disappointing book is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. Now, I've almost read all of his books. I think I only have Final Girls left. And when I first started to read this book, like 200 pages in, I was like, oh, this might be like my third or even second favorite Riley Sager book, of course. House Across the Lake is still my favorite. But I was getting pretty far into this book. I'm like, this is pretty good. Like, I'm really enjoying this. The reason it's on my most disappointing list is because of the ending. I really did not like the ending. Because this whole time, I don't want to spoil, like, what it's about. But, like, you think it's going to be one thing. And I'm like, ooh, that would be pretty cool. But then you get to the ending and you're just like, really? That's what we're doing right now? This is what it's all been leading up to? And yeah, I did not enjoy the ending. I know some people do, and obviously, Riley Sager is a fun author to read because his books are pretty divisive. Like House Across the Lake, a lot of people hated that ending, but I loved it. And then, like there's other books, like I think probably his most safest book, if you could call it that, might be like Home Before Dark. What her I don't even remember what that book is called, but like something like that. And even his newest book, The Only One Left, I really enjoyed it, but a lot of people, like even Stacy, like Riley Sager is one of her favorite authors, and that was her least favorite. I'm like, oh wow. So yeah, it is fun to read them, but like, yeah, I was disappointed because I was thinking like, oh, this is gonna be a new favorite, and then that ending just, ugh, so bad. My next most disappointing read would be Our Share of Night by Mariana Enrique. And this one was very disappointing because I really enjoyed her short stories. Her short stories are very unique. Like a lot of those horror short stories, just like I had never read anything like them. She's very unique. They're very creepy. I was a little hesitant because I'm like, oh, well, she writes really good short stories, but now she's writing this huge 600-page horror novel. Is that going to translate well? And overall, it it's not a bad book. I gave it 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it for the most part, but it wasn't like a new all-time favorite like I was hoping it would be. It starts out very well. I would say part one is probably my favorite. The reason why this book it gets a lower rating for me, it is way longer than it needs to be for one thing, but also just the pacing is wonky and the structure is very weird. Like I said, it's like 600 pages or so. It's written in 6 parts, and each part is written from a different POV. So it's hard to get kind of attached to the story when like, oh, you're in one POV for a long time and then you switch. And then also like I'm kind of contradicting myself because I've said that I like stories that take place in multiple timelines, but like it's just all over the place. Like you get some that are from the 80s and then all of a sudden you're going back to the 60s and then you're jumping back to like the mid 80s, and it's just all over the place. Um, really creepy tones in the book. Like overall, the creepiness factor was there, but overall, like I said, the pacing and the structure of this book were just wonky. My next most disappointed read would have to be Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I've had this book for a long time, and I've definitely heard mixed opinions on this book. Usually people either love it or they hate it. I don't hear too many people saying like, "Oh, it was good." Like it was pretty good. Most people are like, "Oh yeah, this is 5 stars. This is amazing." Or they're like, "Yeah, I hated it." I'm kind of in the category of like I really did not like this book. Starts out good, like the prologue or the first chapter or whatever, pretty good, sets the tone pretty well. But then after that, just barely anything happens. And then the ending is just like a bombardment of craziness happening. And then all of a sudden it just ends. You're just like, the hell did I just read? um, but yeah, for the most part, it was pretty boring. The characters were kind of lackluster for me. And overall, it just did not create this excitement to go on to the next book. So yeah, I will be DNFing the series. I think I gave the book 2.5 stars. I really didn't enjoy it. And it sucks too because I really enjoyed kind of like the premise and the setting. Because it's kind of like a Latin American setting or South American. I don't remember. But yeah, and it had some cool magic stuff and some cool, I don't know. It had elements in there, but overall, it just didn't work for me. And my last most disappointed read of the year, which is a recent read, is Lost Gods by Brahm. I've been looking forward to reading this for a while now because I really enjoyed his other 2 books that I read. The Child Thief, which I gave like 4.5 stars, and Krampus, which is like an all-time favorite, 5 stars. That book was fun as all get out. So I was very much looking forward to this one. I will say though, I did not love it. I did not hate it though. I gave it 3.5 stars. It started out very well, and that's I want to say it's a theme for this list, but a lot of these books did start out well and then ended up not being favorites. Like I said, it starts out well, and it's all about kind of this guy who is in purgatory and he's got to figure out a way to get out. Starts out very good, and then it's kind of weird because like his other books are kind of more like horror adjacent. This one definitely does start out in that vein, but then all of a sudden, the back half of this book definitely much reads like an action thriller kind of tone that I didn't really like. It also, there are like cool drawings in this book, but like in his other books, like every chapter gets their own distinct drawing because Brahm is, a really good artist. This one is different because there are like drawings in the middle, like you get cool stuff like that. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, Krampus and the Child Thief. They're kind of written like they're 400-page books with like 20 to 30 chapters. This one's a bit different. It's got like over 100 chapters, so short, choppy chapters, which y'all should know by now, are not my favorite. I prefer like medium length chapters. Once they get like short and choppy, I don't know, it just doesn't do it for me. And yeah, not a terrible book, but I did enjoy it. Definitely not a new favorite for me, and I probably will be unhauling it. All right, so those are my most disappointing books that I read in 2023. Again, these are not my worst books. I'm probably not even going to be doing like a worst of list. I did my other video, every book that I DNF'd, so technically those are probably my worst books of the year. And then a couple of other books, Black House, which I have a review of by Stephen King, I did not enjoy. Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, second book in the Red Rising trilogy. I don't like Red Rising in that book. I forced myself to read and I did not enjoy it. But overall, these are my most disappointing books. I was hoping to really enjoy these books, and that just did not happen. Let me know what you guys think of my list. Do you agree with me on these books and that they were disappointing, or do you disagree with me and think that these books were awesome? And what were your most disappointing reads of 2023? I want to know, so you better tell me down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and come join the Bookish Charmer Discord where we've got a ton of things going on, including the Thrill Chill or Kill book club. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a fantastic day.